What is up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Fantasy Life Podcast. I am Marcus Grant, joined by Dwayne McFarland, and I had to stop for a second and remind myself what day it is because they're all starting to run together. We are through 6 weeks of the season, Dwayne. We're a third of the way through, and I know you always like to say more data points are better, but I feel like after what happened this past week, it's almost like a reset. I feel like we had to relearn everything. I know we'll talk utilization and stuff, but how are
Yeah.
you feeling after 6 weeks of the season?
No, I think what you're saying is true. I mean, I think there's a few things. Like I went on with Sigmund Bloom today. Went on the couch, got my therapy. So folks can check that out later. But like he was talking about this. He was actually talking about how like since preseason is really not preseason anymore. Probably the first 2 weeks of the regular season are really just the preseason. We really just now have 4 data points. I was like, oh, Marcus is going to eat this up. Like we really only have 4 data points. The first 2 are really just the preseason. But no, I think you're right. The other thing, though, that I've always seen, over the last several years looking at this stuff is we do get these mini trends for 3 or 4 weeks and then things will change. And that makes sense to me, right? If you listen to coaching circles, most teams are looking at the last 3 to 4 games to get ready for their game plan. So a lot of these guys we talk about that are popping in utilization and things, well, guess what? The coach is like, you know how coach speak is like, who's number 99? It's Aaron Donald, but they just call him 99. Like they're like, hey, number so-and-so. Like that guy's getting the ball a lot. This Christian Kirk guy, who's this guy? And then look, now he's seeing tougher coverage. We've seen him go down a little bit, as far as like his box scores here the last couple of weeks. So yeah, I think there's definitely a lot to parse through. And there's some of these trends that are kind of mini trends laid on top of the larger trends.
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely makes sense in the way you're talking about it too, because coaches look at things, what's working, what's not working, how do we adjust from here? And so then of course we all are forced to adjust and make changes accordingly. We got plenty to talk about. We will go through the utilization report, which is up and live now. You can check that out at fantasylife.com. We'll also dive into the Rams backfield because it has been a headache. We spent a lot of time talking about the Rams because they have been one of the bigger mysteries in fantasy so far this year, but we'll dive specifically into the backfield. But let's start with a team that has also been equally a mystery box, and that is the Arizona Cardinals, because here they are, this team with all these weapons, with this coach, Cliff Kingsbury, who once upon a time was hailed as this offensive wonderkind, and they really have not lived up to those expectations. Now, Dwayne, they're dealing with a wide receiver core that is in flux. Marquis Brown is dealing with a foot injury, is going to be out for an extended period of time. Deandre Hopkins expected to be back after his 6-game suspension. They also go and they trade for Robbie Anderson. Have you been able to wrap your mind around? I know we haven't seen all these guys together, obviously. How are you wrapping your head around this Arizona wide receiver group right now?
Yeah, first, I mean, it's sad for Marquis Brown. He was on pace for 122 receptions, 1,374 yards, and 9 touchdowns. So hopefully we get him back after 6 weeks. He was having a really good season. We've talked about him multiple times. He's a guy that in the offseason, I kept looking at him being like, man, like this guy really looks more like DJ Moore. He seems more like Terry McLaurin, a lot of these other guys that we were excited to be drafting, in the, 4th round, 5th round, even like Deontay Johnson. And really, like, he's been the best one out of all of them. He's been the best one this season. You could argue he also has the best quarterback situation. But yeah, I hate this for Marquis Brown. So hopefully we do get him back. But yeah, I did spend a lot of time thinking, through this. We can start with DeAndre Hopkins. We're going to get him back this week. And I went back and looked at DeAndre Hopkins last year and just, it was a really weird year for him, Marcus. So, I mean, if you remember, like he got the shoulder injury right away to start the season. Then he came back. Well, actually, he played through that, but he was basically a decoy for a couple of weeks. Then he started, getting his targets and everything again, was a little more healthy, picked up a hamstring injury. Then when he tried to come back again, we ended up getting him shut down for the season with the MCL. So I think it's kind of hard, like, to look at last year and, folks just point at the raw target percentages and things like that. And they're like, oh, DeAndre Hopkins has hit a cliff. He might be hitting a cliff. Like, it's possible. Like, he's in the age range where it could happen. However, once I just kind of narrowed it down to those games where he was healthy, and it wasn't a huge sample, but he was still over a 23% target share. So, I mean, yeah, we want Hopkins at a 30%. That's what we would love. But I still think this is a guy that probably gets 23, 25% of the targets with Marquis Brown out of the offense. So I'd be interested to hear what you think, but I'm struggling because I'm already starting to think about my rankings, which will go up tomorrow later in the day. I don't see a way to really keep him out of the wide receiver 2 conversation this week. He might be as high as like mid-range wide receiver 2, because we do have several really good receivers also out this week. You won't have Cooper Kupp. You're not going to have Justin Jefferson. Like basically a lot of the elite receivers that we see at the top are out. So it moves guys up a little. But I feel pretty good about Hopkins. I do think it's funny that Cliff Kingsbury came out and said, well, we're going to try. We'll see what we can do. It's a short week. And I'm like, dude, like you just tell him to line up on the left and run like 3 routes. What are you talking about, Cliff? Like this is not rocket science. Like your offense is pretty basic. Like I'm pretty sure like I couldn't walk out there and execute it, but I could probably remember my routes. I wouldn't get open, but I think I would know what to do.
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think there are several things in play that you touched on. One, we've got the Bills, we've got the Rams, as you mentioned, we've got the Eagles on a bye, you got the Vikings on a bye. So you've got a lot of top level wide receivers that are not going to be available to you this week. Also, I think for a lot of fantasy managers, just the reality of if you drafted DeAndre Hopkins, you've been waiting 6 weeks for this moment. So you are itching to put him back in your lineup in any way, shape, or form. And I think for Arizona, it becomes almost a situation of necessity, not having Marquis Brown. Yes, you traded for Robbie Anderson, but this is a guy who first off is coming in on a short week trying to learn everything that he can possibly learn to get ready to get on the field. But also, just from a practical standpoint, this is a guy who wore out his welcome in Carolina, where they need all the help they can get offensively. And he apparently alienated himself so badly that he got moved out of there. So I
And
don't
he
know
is
how.
still going to have to learn the offense, like for sure,
Yes,
right? Robbie
absolutely.
is. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Give me your thoughts on this comp. Like, because I remember when Brandon Marshall was all of a sudden washed after his 9th season, right around the same time, that we're looking at people starting to call DeAndre Hopkins washed. And I was trying to think back to like players that kind of stylistically played like DeAndre Hopkins, right? Hopkins is not a guy that's ever been truly built on, oh my God, I'm going to create all this separation. Hopkins has really been more of he's a good route runner, don't get me wrong, but he's really been more of I'm just always open. Like throw it over here.
Throw it
Like
here.
just throw it over here. And that's really what Brandon Marshall was as well, right? A very physical receiver, even if he had to play through contact, all these kind of things. Even if it was in tight coverage, he was always going to come down with the ball. And I remember that year, that 9th year, his routes trailed off. He was kind of hurt off and on that season, only played 72% of the passing plays. And he only scored like his yards per route run, all the things we look at dropped, went to a 1.50. His PFF receiving grade dropped to a 71.9. And he had been a guy that had been a 90.2 the year before that. And it was like, okay, he's done. But he wasn't. Year 10, he came back 343 fantasy points. He had an 85.8 PFF receiving grade. His target share jumped back to 26%. He never got back to like his years 6 and 5, his alpha peak when he was a 33% targets per route run guy. But still came back and had a really good, that was obviously 343 fantasy points would be really good. That's the comp that comes to my mind. They say that he's completely healthy. He's ready to roll. When I think about the way he wins, like if I want to think of an optimistic side, like Brandon Marshall's the name that comes to my mind.
I think so. And I think when you talk about his style of guys, just, hey, just throw me the ball and I'm going to make a play. I think that is sort of where Kyler Murray had a lot of his success too, because you talk about last year not being a great year for Hopkins because he was sort of playing through a lot of injuries. His numbers were down. You saw Kyler's numbers down a little bit. You go back 2 years ago, though, where we were still getting Nuke Hopkins on the highest level when he had 1,400 yards, had 115 catches. You also saw at that point Kyler Murray still as a top 5 quarterback, because sort of like in the way that you knew Aaron Rodgers was going to find Devontae Adams when everything sort of went wrong, Murray was doing the same with Hopkins. So now, hopefully, with a healthy DeAndre Hopkins, he's going to get those opportunities. Hopefully, that helps Kyler Murray as well. I go back to what the famous Hail Murray play against Buffalo a couple years ago, where it was just like, hey, man, I'm just going to throw it up. And I feel like I got a shot that DeAndre Hopkins is going to come down with the football. You're right. He doesn't have to get separation. He doesn't have to get open. And I think that more than anything, if you have him and you're starting him, gives you at least a little bit of confidence, especially look, he's healthy, he's fresh. He hasn't taken hits for the last 6 weeks of the season. So hopefully that does mean something for him. Do want to ask you though, what this means for Rondale Moore, at least in the short term, because again, guys are missing, guys are still trying to learn the playbook in the case of Robbie Anderson. I don't think Rondale Moore is a guy that you can plug in and expect 18 to 20 fantasy points. But if you are looking for a guy that can be a flex, get you 10 to 12, it feels like Rondale Moore still has that opportunity in front of him right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll hit on Robbie Anderson too, but I'll start with Rondell Moore. Rondell Moore, I was already putting in the wide receiver 3 conversation last week. I was torn on whether I would continue doing that once DeAndre Hopkins returned to the lineup, because I was planning on Marquis Brown also being part of that equation. I was trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with Rondell when that occurs? Because obviously that's more competition coming in for the targets. You have to earn targets, but when you have a lot of other really good people around you also earning targets, right, it decreases like what you have the opportunity to earn. And so that was going to be a factor. But I think for now, like, I would look at him and DeAndre Hopkins and Ertz as being the primary 3, right? I think Robbie Anderson's going to have to work his way in. I do think that this weekend, I haven't done the ranks yet, but just looking at everything that I've looked at with Rondell Moore, I'll probably still have him in the wide receiver 3 conversation, to your point, Marcus, more in that range you just talked about. But I think he does have upside. Like, this guy he's a great after the catch player. We saw that show up last week right away in the first drive. First drive, man, I thought, this is Kyler's week. It's happening. And then like it just like all the air came out. They got down and stalled, inside the 5-yard line, couldn't score a touchdown. I was like, well, that's okay. Still moved the ball really good. And that game just got weird. Would set that aside. But in that first drive, there was a really good play from Rondell Moore after the catch. The most that I've seen him look like what he looked like in college since he's been in the pros. So he can still give you that big play potential. He isn't getting a ton of targets down the field. He's getting some, but like, he's always a threat, right, to score that touchdown. So he could still come through he could catch 4 or 5 balls and give you your 10 points, but one of those could go for 50 for a touchdown. And then that gives you that 20-point outcome in your range. I do like him over a lot of other more traditional kind of slot receivers where we know it has to come through the catches, and you're like, if he doesn't get 8 catches, there's no way I'm getting 15 fantasy points. I do think I think Rondell Moore has a couple of outs. Robbie Anderson, I do think, is interesting. And right now the estimation on Marquis Brown, as we sit here today, this could change, is 6 games, most likely. I do think in the couple of weeks, like, Robbie Anderson could probably up to speed on this offense again, not super complex, and they're just going to tell him to line up on the right side of the field. I think he immediately takes over for AJ Green. And it's funny, like, when we talk about Cliff Kingsbury, we can actually talk about the right and left side of the field. He's going to line up on the right side of the field, y'all. And defenses know this also. That's what's so funny. He will always be there. You always know where he's going to be. Always know where DeAndre Hopkins is going to be. But with Robbie, historically he's been an average target earner, which is not bad. Like, average keeps you in the NFL, right? So if you look at his career adjusted target share, so that gets rid of games where he didn't play, 19%. That's slightly above the NFL average. It is wide receiver 3 worthy. So like, if you look back, it's just below wide receiver 3 worthy. If you look back over since 2011, the average target share, for like a wide receiver 3 in fantasy football is right around 20%. So he's right under that. He's close. But he's going to see a major influx, in the number of routes he's getting to run. Like, he is coming from Carolina, right? So when we look at, Arizona, like, they've been running 46.5 non-overtime passing plays per game. The Carolina Panthers, 34.8. So, I mean, immediately he's going to get to run 10 more routes than what he was probably used to, 8 to 10, depending on what percentage of plays he's running. So I think he'll be somewhere between 6.5, 7.5 targets, per game. He'll be in that 19-20% range, but some of them will be deep shots. So I think that's going to make him probably that boom bust wide receiver 4, that we talk about a lot. They're kind of sitting on the front. It's like the high end tight end too. It's basically the receiver that, wow, if they catch a deep bomb, like, they're going to be in the wide receiver 3 conversation. If they don't, you're gonna be like, what the hell happened to Robbie Anderson? How did he had 3 targets and I got a 0? Like, he didn't catch any of them. Like, that's totally possible. And if for some reason Marquis Brown is out longer than that and he can create more chemistry, and I think he has outs. I think he's a good enough player that, and he's going to have the air yards. Like, he can still come through for you potentially as a wide receiver 3 if Brown misses more time.
Well, and you talk about him being a wide receiver 4. It feels like the last couple of years that has sort of been his lot in life. That guy who you're kind of counting on to catch a couple of those deep throws. It just never seems to have progressed beyond that. I guess the upside there, though, is
he did have the 1 year in 2020 where he surprised us all, and he like tied DJ Moore for targets on the team, right? And we were all just like, Let's go. Remember, Robbie Anderson was running the short routes and DJ Moore was running the deep routes in Bizarro World.
Not what we expected at all. Right.
Right. Yeah.
The good news is, though, he goes to Arizona, where they are more likely to throw the ball deep right now than anything he was seeing in Carolina this year. I think I saw that, PJ Walker, who obviously only got 1 start under terrible circumstances there, did not take a shot beyond 15 yards down the field. I don't know if that has to do with Robbie Anderson getting himself kicked out of the game or not, but we know Kyler's going to take those shots. So at least there's some upside in that respect.
Yeah, and I think it at least for the Cardinals offense, at a minimum, it keeps their offense respectable from a standpoint that the defenses, because that's the thing with Hopkins. He's not that he can't beat you deep and win a contested catch, but he's not going to consistently make the safety just like be completely scared, right? That if they make one misstep, he's just going to be gone. Like that's not the type of player he is. But Robbie Anderson does still have that, right? You've got to respect, you've got to give him the cushion, and then that can open up things underneath. That helps Zach Ertz. That helps, Rondell Moore, like we just talked about. It could help DeAndre Hopkins theoretically, like if they moved him around, but he'll probably be too far away from Robbie Anderson for it to help him.
So we'll see what happens. Of course, we'll get our first look at the Cardinals on Thursday nights against the New Orleans Saints. So it's still very much a work in progress down there in Arizona. I would think for the sake of Cliff Kingsbury, that work in progress better progress very quickly, because I know there's a lot of unrest and a lot of unhappiness down in the desert down there.
Where are you at, Marcus, on Kyler? Because I think Kyler is like the screaming buy low of all buy lows right now in fantasy football.
I think he is, but I think some of it is they've got to get all the pieces together right now, and they just haven't been able to do that. I'm almost to the point where I don't think Kyler is going to be the running threat that he was early in his career that we want him to be. It just doesn't seem like he is really interested in doing that anymore. And I don't know if that has to do with his shoulder injury from a couple of years ago, but the fact that he remains as sort of a top 10 quarterback without really having a whole lot of big time games, without the Cardinals playing really well, suggests that it's going to get better. So, I know that in one quarterback leagues, it's hard to trade for quarterbacks, hard to acquire them. But if you're looking for one in a 2 QB league, maybe there's somebody out there who's a little bit antsy in his weight.
Even in a 1 QB, I feel like people are so like the public sentiment on Murray is, wow, I'm the one person that spent the 5th to 6th round capital like I was supposed to on quarterback this year, so I wouldn't be left out, and I'm still left out. Like that seems to be the narrative. Even though he's QB7, right, and he's scoring 19 points a game, it doesn't feel as good like when Josh Allen's scoring 30. And so that's making it feel like a bigger problem, right? Imagine being the person that's holding Matthew Stafford. It's an even bigger problem for them. And if you're thinking about trading for Kyler Murray, there's a good chance you're holding Matthew Stafford or Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, and you're having to start these guys. So hear me out real quickly on Murray. Right now he's averaging 46.3 dropbacks per game. They're right around average in neutral scripts. So I think if games got more in hand, that number would come down a little bit. But he's also averaging 6.3 rushing attempts per game. His scrambles are down by 2%. But I don't know that it's something that's going to last. They're still using him in the design rushing attempts. So he's 17% of the design rushing plays for the Cardinals right now are going through Kyler Murray. That's number 4 in the league. That's only behind Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Jalen Hurts. So, and then he's kind of in his own little tier because those guys are all like 23, 24%. Allen's closer to 20%. And then you got a bunch of guys below that. So he's really closer to the guys at the top than he is below them. And last week he scrambled 9% of the time. So I think it's still in his bag. And I actually think that potentially Murray, as he becomes more and more frustrated with the offense, he may just decide to do more within, himself, like to try to help keep the offense going. That would potentially put him at more risk for injury. But I don't know. A lot of his injuries have really come in the pocket, not necessarily on the scramble. Like he's pretty good at protecting himself. He still gets late hits. It drives me nuts. These running quarterbacks, when they slide and somebody comes in, as long as they don't hit them in the helmet, a lot of times they won't call it. I'm like, NFL, like if you guys really want to clean up injuries, you know how many plays you see where a guy's already down and a dude just jumps on him because he's not technically down? I would say just when guys fall down, make them down. That way, defenders will not want to come in and take a cheap shot on a guy like in the ribs. I see so many players every week. They're like getting up, wincing. We don't even hear about it. And then the next week, like they're questionable. But back to Kyler, if you look at those numbers, like if you go back to 2011, like there's very few players that have actually hit those numbers. And there's only 5 actually back to 2011 that have been on a pace similar to what Murray's on. And 4 out of the 5, they were all top 5 fantasy quarterbacks. 3 of them averaged 23.5 fantasy points per game or more. 4 of them averaged 22.4 or more. Murray's at 19 right now. I think there's a very good chance that Kyler Murray still ends up as a 22 to 23-ish points per game player. In fact, like if you look at him, he's next to Josh Allen. He's the only one dropping back to throw that much and rushing that much. And I had him as my number 2 quarterback right next to Josh Allen ahead of the season for this exact reason. Like if we go back and you're looking for quarterbacks that are going to get to throw the ball a lot and still going to have that high rushing ceiling, it's not changed for Murray. He still has it. It's just it hasn't worked out yet. And it may not. But there's no one else that you can go after that has this. He is the only person. He's more like the top quarterbacks we all love that we're going, God, wish I would have drafted a top quarterback. He's the one that's the most like all of them. He is them. But people are down on him because it just hasn't happened yet. And here's the beauty. Let's say you go after him and it's a swing and a miss. Great, you have the QB7. We've already seen what it looks like. The Cardinals offense just doesn't get going. He doesn't have a lot of 300-yard passing games, doesn't throw for a lot of touchdowns. He's still running the ball enough to have you to be the QB7 overall in fantasy right now. So I feel like there's not a lot of downside. Like I would be aggressive going after Kyler Murray in any kind of league that you're in, even if you had to give up a little bit more, because you know the floor is there, but the ceiling is still really good. And because of what we talked about last week, it's a bigger deal than ever if you don't have one of the top quarterbacks. And Kyler Murray gives you a chance to level that a lot. And in fact, over the stretch, when you need him most, he could be more than leveling that. He could be one of the 2 to 3 names we're talking about going, oh my God, if you've got Kyler Murray, you're winning it all. Like he still has that. And even with Marquis Brown back, like we talk about all the guys he still has plenty of weapons. And then once Marquis Brown is back and now you've got a cushion with Robbie Anderson, if something happens to DeAndre Hopkins or someone again, you've just got this extra piece that you can plug in that will know the offense. I think there's a lot of positives around Kyler Murray, but mostly just historically, he's been a good player, and historically players that are having seasons like he's having, they're having really monster fantasy seasons. So I feel like things are going to work out in his favor.
Yeah, no, you have completely sold me. Not that I was down on Kyler Murray, but I
Trying to
mean, I
sell
wasn't down
Marcus.
on him. But you know,
You weren't
I was
down on him.
no, I don't think I think it just so far he had been kind of I don't even say meh because
It
he was
has kind of
doing
been
good
meh for
things
him because we've been so
for him.
used to seeing big things. Yeah.
But he was doing good things. I think we expected more because you're right. We were hoping he was going to give you Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts type fantasy numbers, and that hadn't completely materialized. But all the pieces are certainly there for him to put that together. And maybe it is just a question of everybody around him getting healthy and getting productive down the back half of the season. Let's talk more about utilization though across the rest of the league. Let's start with Chris Godwin in Tampa Bay, because the big story about the Bucs this week has been Tom Brady shouting at his offensive linemen and whatever's happening there and all the frustrations with that offense. I've heard some people make the point that there are 3 startable Buccaneers. Brady might not be one of them, but Chris Godwin certainly is. It feels like he's starting to get healthier. I'm still waiting for the big blow up game, but it seems like everything is in place for that to come sometime soon.
Yeah, and I think with Godwin, he's another one where we just have to lean also into what he's been in the past. Like these players that have shown how talented they are, most often, that's the easiest way to know you still have a good player. And especially whenever they're young, like Godwin, he's not an old player. But it's just been the injury. We haven't known for sure, like when will Godwin be back? And I think that he's probably not going to be 100%, this season. And I think that's fair. It was a late season knee injury last year, but they trust him to be out there on the field now. Like, and they're trusting, when I say trust, like they're not worried about him being injured. They had him out there for 91% of the routes last week. So that's a really high number. That's the number that we want our wide receiver ones. We typically want them between 85 and 95% route participation. You could sometimes be a little bit lower than that, especially on a team like the Bucs, because they like to throw the ball so much above expectations. But that's the second game in the last 3 weeks where he's been right at that 90% mark. He was at 89% of the routes in week 4. Week 5, they had the blowout situation going on, so it was only 54%. But it was really just because they didn't need to have him out there at the end of the game. So I'm super excited about him. He had a 31% target share last week. It does feel like there's a blow-up game on the way. I mean, he scored 12.5, 12.3, 15.5 fantasy points over the last 3 games. But I think to your point, you're going to have that 25, 30-pointer. It's coming. It was close last week. It was pretty close last week. He just missed a score. When you have a target share like that in a game where the Bucs are trailing, they're going to throw it all the time anyway. But when they get in a game like that, they're just like, run. What does run mean? Like, no, we're going to just throw it every single play. And so there's a lot of outs for Chris Godwin. He's a guy that if you can still move on him, he's tougher because he's a name that people still believe in, and he's still a young player. But I do agree. I think the big game is coming.
he's a young player in an offense that people still trust, and people still believe in his quarterback. Everything is sort of there, and really the only thing that's kind of missing for him, he hasn't scored a touchdown yet, but everything else
Yeah.
seems to be there. And I think once the touchdowns start to happen, then I think we're really going to talk about that big game for him. We talked about the Jaguars backfield recently, and one of the things you mentioned was we're still sort of trying to figure out who the Jaguars are as a team. And I looked at the snaps between Travis Etienne and James Robinson last week, and they were split fairly evenly between the two of them. It was almost a 50-50 split last week, but the last 3 weeks have been very much Travis Etienne weeks. Can you make any sense of what's happening there? Is it just a matter of Etienne just has become healthier, looks more productive, or is there something else that maybe we're not seeing on the surface?
Yeah, it's really the game scripts. I loved Travis Etienne, to start the season for a lot of reasons. Like, I love pass catching backs that have shown they can make big plays. He checked those boxes. He also had that early round capital. But the other thing that was working in his favor was just looking at, the projected wins from Vegas for the Jaguars weren't high. So we just expected a lot of trailing scripts. The Jaguars came out of the gate over the first couple of weeks, surprised us. Even their defense was playing well. And it was just James Robinson's season, right? Because they were leading. So over the last few games, with them being in closer games, with them trailing more often, we've just seen more Travis Etienne because that really is his role. He is the passing down back. He's not coming off the field for the most part whenever they get into long down and distance situations. He's not coming off the field for the most part when they're he's getting all of the 2-minute offense. So when you're in a scenario like that and the team is trailing, that's going to be a good thing for Travis Etienne. The next step I think we need to see from him, though, Marcus, we just haven't seen him have a big target game. He's still only sitting at a 9% target share for the season. And that's what has me concerned. Even though he's getting to be on the field, the comp that I had for him, coming into the season, was what if you're getting DeAndre Swift? Same thing last year. We knew Jamal Williams was going to be a factor. We knew Jamal Williams would probably be in the game whenever the Lions were leading. We knew Jamal Williams would probably steal some touchdowns. All the same things that James Robinson's doing. This is almost they're almost like a mirror, right, of one another. But the difference being was that DeAndre Swift was seeing 15, 20% target shares. And we haven't seen that yet from Travis Etienne. So he did come up with a big play last week. Now it was the Jags have had some really good, perfectly blocked run plays. We saw James Robinson get to house one. Last week we saw Jermichael Hasty house one. And Travis Etienne almost got to house one. He got caught from behind at the very end. He was about to have a really long touchdown in that game. So we know the explosive playmaking's there. But I'm a little concerned about his ability to earn targets, and they seem to just spread it around across all these guys, right? It's okay, Christian Kirk, you're going to get 22, 25%. Evan Ingram, you're going to get 16, 18%. Marvin Jones, here's 18% for you. Zay Jones, here's 19% for you. It's kind of all spread out, and it just hasn't worked out where Travis Etienne has been able to step into the number 2 or 3 role in the pecking order in the passing game. And we just have Trevor Lawrence. He's just checking the ball down a lot less. Last year, he checked the ball down quite a bit. He's not doing that this year.
Is that, do you think, and we've talked about earning targets, not just getting targets, but earning them. Is this because Trevor Lawrence still hasn't found one guy that he feels comfortable in? Is this just because he's sort of taking what the defense gives him? I mean, I know we're still sort of figuring this out.
Yeah.
Is there a way
to
kind of pinpoint it?
The difference that I see, and actually somebody real smart on Twitter had talked about this, somebody that watches film and knows film way better than me. His name's Jay Moyer. But he had talked about Travis Etienne being someone that in college, even though he had graded out really well in all of his receiving grades, it was all behind the line of scrimmage stuff, right? So all design stuff, screens, lots of motion, get it in his hands. And if you gave him an angle, he was still very dangerous, right? He could pop these long plays. But where he was different than a DeAndre Swift, where he was different than an Alvin Kamara, than a Christian McCaffrey, he was not as good of a route runner when you asked him to really integrate everything he was doing into more downfield concepts. And when we say downfield for running backs, right, it might only be 4 or 5 yards past the line of scrimmage, sometimes 10. Like a running back coming out of the backfield running an angle route, a bullet route, a wheel route, all these sort of things. He had noticed that Etienne had just really struggled with a lot of those concepts. And it shows up in the data because the average depth of target for when I go back and historically look at pass receiving backs that I know are sticky year over year, meaning they continue to be really highly integrated into their passing games, all of them have an ADOT of 2 or higher, or 1 or higher at least. Most running backs you're going to look at, you'll see a negative average depth of target. Why? Because the quarterback goes through their progressions, or covered, check it down. Well, when they check it down, it's a swing pass right next to them. It's 1 or 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, right? Because the quarterback has already dropped back 5 yards. And so that's where these negative average depth of targets come for running backs. And ETN is yet to be really integrated into more of the passing game. And so that keeps him from being a first read on more plays. If you're running a design play to break down a linebacker in space, you're much more likely, based on the coverage the quarterback's seeing, to become the first read. So 71% of targets in the NFL go to the first read. I know we talk a lot about, oh, he's going through his progression. For the most part, it's the first player they look at. It's the first read the most for 70% of the time. So Travis Etienne isn't getting any of those. So the running backs I've noticed that stick out, that kind of the next data point I've found, because PFF has some really cool stuff in the back end, you can go in and you can look and see when they were the first read target. And Travis Etienne has not been getting those. And I eliminate screens because obviously on a screenplay, you're going to have to be the first read. Right. So trying to look at, okay, when, it's not that kind of scenario and they're just trying to work you more into the route concept, what does it look like? And those are the two steps I haven't seen him take yet. He's not been really the first read target outside of screenplays, and he's not working downfield. So I don't know. He just may not be those other guys. And it also could just be design. They could just be deciding they don't want to do that because they have 4 other guys they like that they want down the field, and they want to keep him more behind the line of scrimmage. I think there's a lot of reasons that could be happening, but ultimately it is hurting him that those two things are not happening.
Well, and here's the thing. There's nothing wrong with that, right? There are plenty of running backs who have survived and who have
not that there's anything wrong with that,
right? Exactly. Not there's anything wrong with that. There are plenty of guys who have flourished, despite not being downfield passing threats or anything like that. But it's just sort of an interesting wrinkle.
And it's not to say he can't do it as well, right?
True.
I mean, we don't know for sure. Like, and players get better. Players can get better. There's certain things that they may not be able to improve, like speed, kind of hard to improve. But your understanding of a football game. Technique-based things, there's always a chance for improvement. Like, you may not ever reach the elite level, but I think we're still early in Etienne's career to get to like overemphasize it too much. Those were just the things I noticed.
Yeah, and just gonna mention that for all intents and purposes, this is his rookie year. He missed all of last year, so this is basically the rookie year for Travis Etienne. Definitely not the rookie year for Aaron Jones, and I think a lot of us came into this year thinking with no Davante Adams, Jones was going to be the workhorse. They were going to lean on him, obviously, as a runner, but also in the passing game. If I remember right, he had, I think, 4 touches at halftime of that game against the Jets on Sunday. In the end, it was A.J. Dillon who was getting more of the touches, more of the work. It didn't really seem to work out. I'm worried about the Packer offense as a whole. Should I be worried about Aaron Jones specifically, or can we just say this was an outlier of a game?
Yeah, I think overall it's still an outlier of a game, but I think the more systemic problems that you kind of highlighted, like I am worried about them, because I think Aaron Jones, like, look, Allen Lazard has played nice. He's earning like a 20% target share. Romeo Doubs, they're getting more than they thought out of him. He's right around a 20% target share as well. But neither one of those guys are alphas, right? They're not going to demand that 25, 30% target share. They need another weapon, and they need a dynamic weapon. Those other two so far, Lazard is much more of a contested catch guy, right? He's nice down inside the 5, inside the 10. He's not typically a big threat unless there's a busted coverage to do a lot. He can be very physical after the catch. Romeo Doubs, more of an athletic, kind of guy, like makes some acrobatic catches. He might be able to do some things after the catch. We haven't seen it so far, but we know Aaron Jones can do things after the catch. And we know you could get him into matchups down the field, which he has shown us to do. All the things we just talked about with ETN that we haven't seen yet, those are part of the reasons that I was very bullish on Aaron Jones, is he had actually shown us that he could do all those things. So we would have an opportunity to really be more of a first read type running back, and he could have potentially been like Kamara, like back in the old days, right? When it was Kamara and Mark Ingram, 5 years ago. And that just hasn't played out. All the splits we've looked at historically, when Davante Adams is out, Aaron Rodgers has really loved going to Aaron Jones. He had used him more in all those situations. And again, it was a small sample, but it was like over 3 years where we had like 7 or 8 games. So it wasn't like the small, that's what we do in this game. We deal with small samples. It just hasn't come through. So I do think from that perspective, we have to be worried. I think, if I'm the Packers, like, you just got to center more of your game plan around these backs. And I get it. Even when if you come out and you're trailing like you have the last 2 weeks to the Giants and the Jets, I understand. But those are the games where, like, Aaron Jones should just be much more integrated into the offense and the passing game. We just haven't seen it yet. So I'm definitely concerned about it. But I will say we know the skill set is there for Aaron Jones. Anytime that is there, there's always the chance. And you talked about this earlier in the show. Coaches have to adjust. They have to figure out what's working, not working. Early in the season, like Packers kind of had things going their way. The last two games, these are look in the mirror games. And so I think there's a chance we see a change for Aaron Jones. I'm not gonna panic too much on him. I've had him as a mid-range RB2 for the last couple of weeks based on the utilization stuff I've seen with upside to be an RB1 in any week. I'm leaving him there for now. But maybe we see him get more involved. Like we know he has the skill set to do it.
I think that's sort of what I'm holding on to right now. And again, the Packers still very much in the thick of the playoff race. And early in the season, it just looked like they were an offense that was we're going to run the football. We're going to play defense. This is how we're going to win. And that hasn't really been working out for them the last couple of weeks. But I'm not ready to just pull the shoot on Aaron Jones. But like I said,
yeah, he has an 11% target share. That could easily be 16, 17%. Like it's there to be given. Like this is the Packers. Like look at the depth chart. Like they can make it happen. And again, like you can scheme stuff like that for running backs because you have mismatches all day. You have instant space created by where they line up in the backfield. It's kind of like slot receiver on steroids. Like a slot receiver gets immediate, separation or cushion right at the play call because they can't press them, depending on the alignment. Typically, the slot, though, is off the line of scrimmage. Well, running back has the same thing, and then it's almost always a linebacker. So if you're a good route runner like Aaron Jones is, I mean, 80% of the time, it's going to be a mismatch with whoever you're up against. And he's probably a mismatch against 60 to 70% of safeties. So there's a lot of room for them to tweak the scheme. And honestly, they don't have to up his snaps or anything. Like his route participation's been fine. Like his route participation has been borderline great. They just need to use him more whenever he's on the field.
I think that's just sort of it. Just give the ball to your good players. Sometimes
it's easy, right?
Sometimes it's really, really easy. We talked a little bit about Travis Etienne and the Jaguars. I know you are really optimistic about Christian Kirk, who came out of the gates on fire. He's slowed down a little bit, but I think he's slowed down sort of as the Jaguar offense has hit a little bit of a speed bump the last couple of weeks. But everything about his utilization has been great. And you really feel like Christian Kirk's kind of a buy low opportunity right now.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, like he started off really hot, came out and he had 17.7 fantasy point PPR in week 1, then a 25.8, then a 19.2. And you know how we do. By then, everybody's like, wow, is this guy wide receiver 1 now? And then, again, 3 weeks worth of film. Then he's going up, and the defenses are like, oh, here's this guy, 8.3 fantasy points, 1.5, 12.8. So it's been, it's not terrible. Like you'll take the 12.8, like you live with it, right? These are the kind of things that, that happen. I still think he's a mid-range wide receiver too. I haven't moved him down because really the target shares have still been great. So if you look at those last 3 games where it hasn't happened for him, he had a 41% target share in week 4. He had a 7% target share in week 5, not good. But then he had a 32% target share in week 6. So my main concern around Christian Kirk coming into the season, I just didn't know if he could move past being a tertiary player, right? He had always been really more of a sidekick, and he had never shown that he could truly take that next step and dominate target shares. And as far as I'm concerned, like I think that he can now. I've seen it 3 games out of 6. He in week 1 he had a 28% target share, and he's been 20% plus every game. That one game where he was at 7%. I think the other nice thing is we have some of the other Jaguars showing at least enough and that they're willing to spread the ball around to some of these other guys. Like that can help Christian Kirk as well because the defense can't solely focus on him. Also, he plays in the slot mostly. So that's another way that they can immediately still help, kind of keep him away from the best covers that the other team has to offer. I think some of this has also just come back to this last weekend, we didn't have a real big passing day overall out of Trevor Lawrence. Like he didn't even get to 200 yards passing. He had the 2 rushing touchdowns, which saved his day. But the Jaguars, passing game just really wasn't. If this was a game where it was really humming and we had a 32% target share to Christian Kirk, like it would have been people wouldn't even be doubting. So yeah, I think I've seen enough from the data to be like, okay, like if somebody's really buying into these last 3 weeks and they think he's really more of a wide receiver 3 now, I would totally be willing to pay that wide receiver 3 price and know that I still probably have a mid-range wide receiver 2 that could still surprise us and be low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2.
And I think when you talk about Christian Kirk, and you're right, the euphoria that there was after the first couple of weeks of the season, when we're talking about, is he going to be a wide receiver one now? I think, look, I don't think he was as good. He is as good as what we saw the first few weeks. I don't know that he's necessarily kind of as bad as what we've gotten fantasy wise the last couple of weeks, but I do think, one of the things to factor in is that you're talking about a Jaguars offense that is sort of kind of a mid tempo team at best. They are, as the kids would say, they're kind of a mid offense in general, right? They're not going to run up and
They're
down the
just
field.
mid.
They're not going to score. They're not going to score a lot of points. And so because of that, Kirk, even as a guy who's showing he can win targets, showing that he can be a little bit of an alpha, at least within the context of that offense, I think always is going to have a little bit of a cap on his production just because of the nature of the offense that he's in. So it's great. He's maybe going to be better this year than he has been for most of his career, but he is still going to be at best kind of a wide receiver too. But we're certainly glad we got those spike weeks early just to prove to us that he can do it.
Right.
If we wanted him to, so that is certainly encouraging there. We talked about Jacoby Myers last week, and
Mm-hmm.
the Patriots offense is not one that we were very excited about coming into the season. They had a lot of kind of pieces that we were okay with, but nothing that really, really excited us. Jacoby Myers, though, has sparked a lot of interest. Then all of a sudden, Tyquan Thornton scores 2 touchdowns last week, including a rushing touchdown, which is cool for him. I guess I'm happy for him as somebody who has Ramondre Stevenson. It's nice
Mm-hmm.
to see them share the wealth. Is this really a thing, or is this a thing for last week?
I think this one's tough, right, to really say. It could be either one of those two things. I know people won't like that answer. You got to make a stand. I'm just honest. I will only just tell you
sometimes
things
life
what I
is
honestly.
sometimes life is in the gray areas, man. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So, I mean, there were some circumstances that certainly occurred that helped Tyquan Thornton, right? Number one, you had Nelson Aguilar inactive. Now that you could say they wanted him active over Aguilar, but Aguilar was battling an injury last week. So I don't know for sure if that was injury related or if it was just not they just wanted to give Tyquan an opportunity. Tyquan had been active the week before as well, and then you had Kendrick Bourne get hurt early in the game. So that pretty much meant Tyquan Thornton, was on the field. He saw a season high 73% route participation. And the thing that he's done that's really nice is over his first 2 games to get to play, his target rate, so not target share. So this is basically taking their targets and dividing it by the number of routes they've run, which is something I really like to do for guys we haven't got to see in a full-time role. It can kind of help you understand, okay, like what might they be able to do, right? Because their target share is going to be like, oh, 10%. But then you're like, well, he only got to play 40% of the time. So 20% was his targets per route run over the first 2 weeks. So kind of gives you an idea where he potentially could be. The other thing I like is running, really more of a full route tree. Wasn't completely. As soon as you see somebody at a rushing touchdown, the first thing you want to look for is like, okay, is this a gadget player? And no, he did get that opportunity, but that's probably more just based on his athletic ability. But it also just shows you they want to get him the ball. They're getting the ball in the running game. He did score a touchdown in the receiving game as well. Like his ADOT was fine. So I think overall he's doing what he can do that's within his control to earn more in the offense. This is still Bill Belichick. This is still the Patriots. This is these guys love to rotate like players like underwear. Like it doesn't matter what position. They rotate everything. Jonnu Smith, Hunter Henry, gonna rotate. Running backs, Ramondre Stevenson, Damian Harris. Oh, wait, Ty Montgomery. Yep, gonna rotate. Like it's just what they do. It's in their DNA unless you get a situation where things narrow down enough. But I think the positive for Thornton, you tell me what you think, is I don't think the pecking order in front of him, it doesn't scare me. I feel like Jacoby Myers is going to do his thing. He's going to play in the slot as a totally different role. But like Devontae Parker, you talked about mid. Like Devontae Parker, you're like mid. Nelson Aguilar, mid. Kendrick Bourne, mid. Like, so I think he could tip the scales in his favor by just continuing to play really well. I don't know if it's going to be an instantaneous payoff. That's the question.
Right. I don't think that is, because I think, as you mentioned, Belichick is going to sort of mix and match pieces until he finds someone, or someone basically steps up and grabs this
Just forces it.
opportunity
Yeah.
by the throat. And right now it's still very much up for grabs. I think as you said, Jacoby Myers is sort of locked in where he is, but everybody else is on the carousel right now. And Thornton, at least last week, showed that he is worthy of at least more opportunity going forward. So now it's up to him to see if he can kind of keep that going.
So he's at
Yep.
least on one of those ponies on the carousel that move, right? You know, when
Right.
you're a
He's not one
kid,
of
I
the
mean, you had to go
stationary
ride the
ones.
carousel, yeah, and like my mom would be like, "Your sister wants to ride the carousel." I'm like, not whatever. Anybody can ride a carousel. I found it boring when I was a kid, and I was like, fine, but at least get me on one of the ones that moves up and
It
down.
goes up and
You
down.
know, I can't be on the one that's just stationary. Like, come on, you got to entertain me, mom. But yeah,
Absolutely.
so hopefully, Taekwon is at least on one of the carousel ponies that moves up and down.
That's what that's got to be we got to create this some kind of meme, right? With like receiver carousels or running back carousels. Like, who are the dynamic players that are going to go up and
Yeah,
down, and who are
see?
going to be the guys that like
Just
stay static,
stationary.
and and who are the guys that are like the big like 2-seater bench that really does nothing for
Yeah,
anybody.
that was the one your parents got into.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the one. Speaking of carousels, we might as well talk about this Broncos backfield
Oh my
because
god.
Javonte Williams goes down with an injury. Mike Boone steps in, and we all looked at this as, hey, here it is. It's the Melvin Gordon, Mike Boone show. And, my pal Adam Rank made a joke earlier in the week that, hey, Latavius Murray is going to step in here and he's going to get touches. And I sort of was like, of course it is, because, we're picking the opposite. But I didn't really believe it. And then Monday night happened. And suddenly Melvin Gordon is sitting over on the bench, and Latavius Murray and Mike Boone are getting all this work. I want to right now chalk it up to Melvin Gordon sort of being banged up. He came into that game questionable. He had a neck issue. He had, I think, a rib issue as well. I just want to believe that this was because Melvin Gordon wasn't 100%. But nothing about Nathaniel Hackett's coaching style through the first 6 weeks has made a whole lot of sense. So maybe Latavius Murray is actually here to wreck the party for all of us going forward.
I
I hope
think,
not, but maybe.
man, well, I think, this party's already wrecked, right? It is the Broncos offense. But Gordon came out after the game. I think it might have been today actually. And he came out and said, I'm just as confused as you guys, basically. Like, I was available. I felt I could have helped us win the football game. Like, I think I could have contributed, and it just didn't work out that way. So like, if we're piecing it together and we're trying to go down narrative street, we heard the rumors that Melvin Gordon might have been cut after that, game with the fumbles had Javonte Williams not gotten hurt. We also know for sure now, and this is how cruel the fantasy gods are, like, we were about to get true full on Javonte Williams. You never go full Javonte Williams. No, yeah, you do. We were about to get it, and he got hurt that game, which is, sad for him, period. I hate to see a player get hurt. But for fantasy managers across the world, you were about to get 70, 80% Javonte Williams. Like, it was about to be going down, and you were going to be excited. With Murray, man, I don't know what to do. I still think it's something that could flip back and forth between him and Gordon. I refuse to think that Murray is better than Melvin Gordon. Melvin Gordon is a guy that, that was the big scare with Javonte Williams, is that every time you would talk about a stat for Javonte Williams did this, and this. And then if anyone was smart were to ask you, what did Melvin Gordon do last year? And you were like, oh, well, he was really good too. Like, he wasn't quite that good, but he was really good. But age can come in a hurry, right? These cliffs can hit for these running backs. A lot of times we don't get any warning. It just happens. It's just funny that it's like a guy that we thought was already over the cliff. We thought this guy had already fallen down the cliff and was sitting at the bottom of the ravine with like 2 broken legs, just like begging someone to pick him up. Latavius Murray, he's going to be 33 in January, right? A nice player over his career, but not somebody I would have thought would have taken the role from Melvin Gordon. But you hit it. This is Nathaniel Hackett, man. Like, I don't know. I don't know anything. Don't ask me anything about the Broncos anymore, Marcus. I can't reason. I can't figure it out. I think I just want to avoid it, though. Mike Boone was still out there for all the passing work. We saw Latavius Murray handle 47% of the snaps, but 68% of the rushing attempts. You could easily see that flip-flop back to Melvin Gordon. And an offense this bad, though, I don't want to touch any of these backs. I don't like committee running backs anyway. I especially don't like 3-way committee backs playing on bad offenses. Like, it's just, to me, let someone else deal with the headache.
I say we can always figure out a 2-player rotation. A 3-player rotation is a nightmare. A 3-player rotation in a bad offense is a non-starter, I think, at this
night
point.
terrors. Those would be night terrors.
Right, exactly. That's exactly
nightmares, and then there's night terrors.
Nightmares and
the ones you wake up with like the cold sweats. Yeah, that's the Denver backfield.
That's the Denver backfield right now. Would the Giants wide receiver sort of count as night terrors too, because we can't seem to keep one for more than 1 week in a row. But Wan'Dale Robinson had a decent game, so maybe now with Kadarius Toney, I don't know what's happening with him. But
I was like, where are you about to go with this?
I was like,
What are we gonna say?
that's all I got.
No, just kidding. Kadarius Toney. Like, we'll just
There's
move.
Tony. I don't know what's going on there. I mean, Wandale the pivot for now in New York.
Yeah. Well, here's the positive for Wandale, right? We've got the second round draft capital. He earned targets at a high rate in college. He did it at a pretty early age. There were a lot of things to like. He just got hurt in week 1. The next thing to like is no one else there has been able to keep a job or earn any targets. And all the guys that are on the team outside of Kadarius Toney, which we'll just, I don't know. I mean, we can call him like redacted or something moving forward. I don't know. They are also they've not earned targets in their career other than Kenny Golladay, which talk about redacted, like Kenny Golladay, like just draw a little line through it. So I think there's a real potential here for Wandale Robinson. He only got to play, he was only out there for 35% of the routes last weekend, so they were definitely just easing him in. But man, a 36% targets per route run. Again, that's why we like that data point, because it helps us understand if a player is in a limited role, he's not going to get a 36% target share, folks. It's not what I'm saying. But my thought with Wandale Robinson is he has flashed. He has a lot of the other things in his history that we like. His talent, he can go as far as his talent will take him. And right now, there's really nothing standing in his way. So I would expect this role to grow next week. I don't know when it'll be a full-time role. It might be 2 weeks from now, because it seems Brian DeBoll definitely seems to be a dude that's like, you're going to earn it. I'm not giving you jack shit. Like, you have to earn everything. And so I think from that perspective, it might not happen. It could happen next week. I'm not going to feel super confident with him in a lineup next week. But I think by the week after that, I don't know when the Giants' bye is, but in another game after this one, I think we might be in a situation where, like, wow, Wandale Robinson was out there 75% of the routes. Last weekend he had a 22% target share. It's wide open for the taking. And the Giants' offense, they're doing a couple things nice. Number one, we always talk about the average play clock remaining. And they're like in the top 3 on that. So they're running, their offense with some pace. They've done a nice job with time of possession. Now, some of that comes back to the opponents that they've played, but I think it's enough that I would look at him. Yeah, I'm not crazy about the Giants passing game, but I think he could earn enough target share there that it would make him someone that we like as a wide receiver 3. And who knows, maybe he surprises us and he's a little more than that.
Well, and they're sort of like the Patriots in that there's a lot of guys there, and
yeah,
taken
very similar coaching
control.
style. That's a great call.
Right. Like they none of them have taken control of any opportunities there. And so look, the Giants right now, I'm looking it up. Their bye week is week 9, which actually unfortunately comes in a week where there's 6 teams on a bye. I was gonna say Wandale Robinson seems like he's in play in one of those super bye weeks. Unfortunately, the Giants
he is on the super bye week.
They're out. They're in the super bye weeks, but we'll see if there's some opportunity for him when that comes along. Of course, for more of the utilization report, be sure to check that out. It is always a worthwhile read. It is up at fantasylife.com. As we get ready to wrap things up, we started with the Cardinals, who have been a black box, a wonder box of mystery, I guess, on one end of the NFC West. On the other end of the NFC West, there are the Rams, who we've talked a lot about their struggles, especially with the offensive line and Allen Robinson not being as productive as we wanted. But there has been a mess in their backfield. Cam Akers looks like he has played his final snap with the Rams. He is on the trade block. The Rams say they are willing to listen to offers. Daryl Henderson is still there. Kyron Williams is a guy that, certainly people have brought up. I don't know how excited you are about that. Malcolm Brown is still hanging around there. Do we make any sense of this? I feel like for me, it's a situation of just kind of walk away from it completely, because it has Denver Broncos vibes to it, but maybe there's a silver lining that I'm not seeing right now.
I think that's one way to approach it for sure. The offensive line is terrible, right? So that's a problem.
And they just lost one more guy in Joe Noteboom too, which makes it even worse.
It's not getting better. I think the silver lining here, though, is we do have a coach that has shown us in the last 2 seasons to just ride one back at a time, for stretches. And so if you can get that, even if the offensive line isn't great, they can still come through for you as a running back 2 in fantasy. If we look at the Rams, like in their pass rate over expectation, like in trailing, close, leading game scripts, they like to throw the ball. And I think maybe they've just figured out that, look, we can't run the ball. Also, we're trailing a lot because we can't score points. So maybe they just want to wrap their offense completely around the axle of the passing game. It seems like they need a running game to balance things out, because like Matthew Stafford is just getting teed off on. Like he's going back for a play action on like 2nd and 3 or something last week. The defensive end did not even stop to see if the running back had the ball. He was just basically, as soon as Stafford turns around to think he's about to unheave this, no, he's not. I'm just going to earhole him. Like, and I've seen that a couple times. So I do like Kyron Williams. Let's start with Daryl Henderson real quick. We did see him move into that lead role. You mentioned Cam Akers. We'll see what happens. I know the Rams want to trade him. There's a real good chance they just have to release him. I don't know if anybody's going to trade anything for Cam Akers. A running back that hasn't shown us anything, not a real high draft pick, coming off the Achilles, hasn't really been the same since then. But that could actually be better. If Cam Akers were to get released, right, he can have more of a say, right, and a choice and picking where he goes. And who knows? We'll have to keep an eye on him. Maybe he ends up turning back into something. But Daryl Henderson has, at least shown us that McVay has trusted him in pretty much an every down role. And we saw that this last week. He dominated snaps 71% of the time. And he's also out there on the passing down, 66% route participation. That's elite. And 10% target share. He's never been a big target earner. That's the problem. We'll see Daryl Henderson, and I'm always like, hey, guys, Daryl Henderson, 65% route participation. Then I have to look away from the mic and be like, 2 targets. Kind of drop it in there. Like he's not real integrated into the passing game. He'll have some games where he does catch a few balls. And he was decent at it in college, but just hasn't really translated for whatever reason to the NFL. And that's where I kind of lean to Kyron Williams. Kyron Williams is really good out of the backfield. And so I almost feel like Daryl Henderson, even though they've used him that way, has kind of been a misfit in that role. And if you get rid of Akers, I'm almost wondering, does Daryl Henderson just really become more the early down back, mix it up a little bit with Malcolm Brown? And does Kyron Williams have a chance? Kyron Williams, if he has a chance to take over the passing downs, and if that really just becomes the identity of the team, whether it's forced on them because they're not very good and they trail all the time, or just because they're like, our running game sucks and we don't really have a running back that we want to drain, 25 touches on, just handing them the ball behind a bad offensive line. That could also be, that's a possibility, right? That's just not worth doing. And so that makes me like Kyron Williams. I do think that he's someone you really want to go after if you're playing a deep league and stash him, because I feel like without an injury, like Malcolm Brown is just a dude. Like he's just a dude. Could he be a nuisance to your point? Yeah. But if I had to pick a guy on the team that I'm like, I want to stash that player, it's definitely Kyron Williams. And I think he could take over the backfield without an injury. That's the thing we're always looking for. A lot of backs, you have to get lucky. Someone else in front of them has to go down. McVay doesn't seem to be very happy with any of these guys. And they've been very excited about Kyron Williams behind the scenes. All the beat reporters have talked constantly about how much the team loves Kyron Williams, how they had a big plan for him, in fact, in week 1 that did not work out because he got the high ankle sprain, ended up having to have surgery. But they've got a bye week this week. So remember that. So if you get him, like he's still on IR right now. So if you have an IR spot, that would be a great time. Throw him on the IR spot now. They're probably not going to pull him off IR in the bye week. They won't do it until the following week. And then you can make a decision about who you want to cut off your roster. So if you've got an IR spot, he's an easy pickup. You carry him for free. If you're being forced to make a decision, like I would rather have him than Latavius Murray. Mm-hmm. Like I feel like, this is still a young player with an upside. And I still think the Rams have a better chance of turning their offense around than probably the Broncos, like just from what I've seen. They're both bad situations. But I would lean to the younger player, in this case. My gut says with Latavius Murray, we're going to have this conversation every week of who is the lead back in the Denver Broncos backfield. And it could be that way for the Rams as well, but at least like one of the options is a really young player, right? That potentially has some upside we don't know about.
Well, and I feel like when we get to these conversations, whether it's whatever team we're talking about, if you're asking me, do I want this movie that I've seen a few times and I know how it ends and it's okay, it's nothing spectacular, it's not an all-time classic, or do I want this movie that, hey, man, it's got some unknown actors in it, but it looks exciting and hey, it could be something that I've never seen before? I'm going to take the new movie. I'm not going to take the same old, just kind of run-of-the-mill movie. And I feel like that's what we're talking about with whether it's Daryl Henderson.
I'm with you. And I think that's a great analogy, actually. Yeah. And as simple as it may sound, and it could be wrong, that's right. I want the unknown. Give me the unknown. Like, right? give me the, I don't know what's behind door number 3. Yeah. I know door number 1 with Latavius Murray. I've been there. Right? And I also know what that kind of a rotation can look like. I've seen that too. So yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, so I mean, again, maybe it ends with Kyron Williams the same way it's ended with Daryl Henderson, but there's at least the hope that there's something different there. And I think that, especially at this point in the season when you're just looking for upside guys, that is the excitement about having Kyron Williams there. So we'll figure it out. And again, maybe sometimes maybe the answer is none, but we'll figure it out all together as we kind of go through the rest of this season with the Rams, the Cardinals, the Broncos, and pretty much everybody else. So we've gotten through the first part of the week. We've kind of looked back. Now it's time to look ahead. I know, Dwayne, you're headed back into the lab. You're going to start with rankings. We're going to kind of dive back into that. So look forward to what's to come. We're certainly not done as we turn the page to week 7. Looking forward to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I am looking forward to it. And it's like you said, there's just a lot of little things going on right now. And so, I mean, I'll be parsing through all that. I started to unveil last week a lot of the things, really around man and zone coverage in the rankings. I know I had a lot of people saying that they really love that stuff. And I only use the extremes, for those kind of cases, players where we know there's a clear split for them. And then you got to be playing against a team that uses one or two of those things way more than the rest of the league to get an edge. But it actually came through, this last week, and on multiple players, as far as where we thought it's probably going to be more of a Amari Cooper target share game, right? It's probably going to be more of, this other player target share game. Talked about Mike Williams being really, having a lot of problems against zone coverage for his career. Just does not get looked at a lot. And when you're playing the Broncos, they run a ton of zone. And people will say, it's Patrick Surtain. Patrick Surtain was on him for like 9 coverage snaps as the primary cover guy. Like, that's the thing with these matchups. They move these guys. Well, besides Cliff Kingsbury, most offenses move their players around a lot, and if you're playing zone, a lot of times these defenses don't move their corner with them. So lots of cool stuff like that. I will make sure to have plenty more of those types of nuggets in the ranks, and then we can come back and talk about it on Thursday.
Sweet. Sounds good. Looking forward to it. Making a plan to be there. You should make a plan to be there as well. In the meantime, we appreciate you making a plan to be here right now. For Dwayne, I am Marcus. This has been another edition of the Fantasy Life Podcast. We appreciate you checking us out. Of course, always go check out the fantasylife.com website. You can go get a lot of great information there, the utilization report. Sign up for the free newsletter while you're there if you haven't as well. But we got plenty more to come with you later on this week. Enjoy the rest of your couple of days, and we'll talk to you soon.